Just south of San Francisco sits a small town unlike any other in the United States. A town where the number of people buried here vastly outnumbers the number of people living here. A town known as the City of Souls. Within this quiet hillside landscape are cemeteries belonging to many different communities. Jewish cemeteries, Catholic cemeteries, Chinese cemeteries, and one cemetery built by a group of immigrants who crossed an ocean to start new lives in California. This is the Italian Cemetery in Colma, established in 1899 by members of the Italian Mutual Benevolent Society. This cemetery became final resting place for generations of Italian American families who helped shape San Francisco. The fishermen of North Beach, the laborers, the shopkeepers, the families who built a community far from the country they once called home. Behind these gates are more like a century of stories. Stories of immigration, stories of hardship and opportunity, stories of families whose names may never appear in history books, but whose lives helped build the city we know today. Today we're stepping inside the Italian Cemetery in Colma to explore the history behind the gate. Why cemeteries moved to Colma, California? In the 1800s, San Francisco buried its dead within the city. Several large cemeteries existed inside city limits. These included Laurel Hill, Calvary, Oddfellows, and Masonic Cemetery. As San Francisco grew rapidly in the late 1800s, city leaders began to see cemeteries as occupying valuable land that could be used for development. There were also public health concerns at the time, although many historians now believe those fears were exaggerated. In 1900, San Francisco passed an ordinance that effectively banned new burials within city limits. Over the following decades, many remains were gradually relocated south of the city. The small rural community of Colma became primary location for those new burial grounds. By the early 20th century, Colma had begun to transform into a place devoted largely to cemeteries. It eventually became known as the City of the Souls. Italian immigrants began arriving in California in large numbers during the mid-1800s, especially after the gold rush. Many of the earliest immigrants came from Liguria, a coastal region of northern Italy. The port city of Genoa was particularly well represented among early arrivals. These immigrants often found work connected to San Francisco's waterfront economy. Common occupations included fishing, produce distribution, small grocery businesses, labor, and trade work. Over time, the neighborhood of North Beach became the center of Italian life in San Francisco. Italian immigrants formed tight-knit communities and often created mutual aid societies. These organizations helped members with medical care, employment assistance, and funeral costs. One of these groups was known in English as the Italian Mutual Benevolent Society. The Italian Cemetery in Colma was established in 1899. On December 31st, 1898, the land was purchased by the Italian Mutual Benevolent Society. The purpose of the cemetery was to provide a burial ground for members of the Italian immigrant community and their families. Unlike some cemeteries in the area, the Italian cemetery was not operated by the Catholic Archdiocese. Instead, it was managed by the Italian Cemetery Association, closely tied to the Mutual Aid Society. This meant the cemetery was deeply connected to the community that created it. Burials began soon after the land was acquired. As the Italian population of San Francisco grew, the cemetery became an important place for preserving family connections and cultural traditions. One of the earliest major structures in the cemetery was completed in 1904. This building is known as the Porperato Chapel and Receiving Vault. It was designed by architect John A. Porperato. Receiving vaults were common in cemeteries during this period. They were used to temporarily hold remains before burial. This was particularly useful when graves could not immediately be prepared. The cemetery also served as a place where funeral services could be held before interment. Its construction marked an important moment in the development of the cemetery as a permanent institution. In 1906, San Francisco was struck by a devastating earthquake. Today, the earthquake is estimated to have been approximately a magnitude of 7.8. The earthquake and the fires that followed destroyed large portions of the city. More than 3,000 people are believed to have died. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble. North Beach, home to many Italian families, was heavily affected. Although the Italian cemetery had already been established before the earthquake, the disaster reinforced the importance of Colma as the region's burial center. As the cemetery grew during the early 20th century, monuments became more elaborate. Many families chose marble headstones and statues. Marble was often imported from Carrara, Italy, one of the most famous marble regions in the world. Italian burial traditions often emphasized family plots where multiple generations would be buried together. Common symbols carved into monuments include angels, crosses, draped urns, and broken columns. Each of these symbols carries traditional meanings connected to mourning and remembrance. One of the most striking features of the Italian cemetery is the presence of multi-generation family monuments. Many graves list several members of the same family. The inscriptions reveal the story of immigration across generations. Early monuments include Italian language inscriptions. Later monuments gradually shift towards English. This reflects the experience of immigrant families becoming part of the American society. Communities in San Francisco, including the Italian community, faced major challenges during the early 20th century. One of the most significant events was the 1918 influenza pandemic. The pandemic affected cities around the world. Cemetery records from many burial grounds show increased numbers of deaths during this time. In cemeteries like this one, clusters of similar burial dates sometimes reflect that difficult period. As Italian-American families became established in California, many later generations served in the United States military. Veterans of several wars are buried here also, including World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Military headstones often appear alongside family monuments. These markers represent transition of immigrant families into fully integrated American communities. Burial traditions in the United States began to change during the late 20th century. Cremation became increasingly common. Many cemeteries, including the Italian cemetery, added columbarium niches for cremated remains. Lawn sections with flat markers also became more common because they are easier to maintain. Even as burial practices evolve, cemeteries continue to serve as places of remembrance. The Italian cemetery in Colma represents more than a burial ground. It reflects the history of immigration, community, and family in San Francisco. The names carved into these monuments tell the story of people who crossed oceans, built neighborhoods, and helped shape the city. Many of them were fishermen, laborers, shopkeepers, and parents. Their stories may not appear in history books, but they remain preserved here in stone. And here in Colma, those stories continue to be remembered. As we step back from the gates of the Italian cemetery, the landscape begins to feel different. The noise of the modern world just fades a little. The wind moves across the marble monuments, and the quiet that surrounds a place like this becomes more noticeable. Cemeteries often sit quietly on the edge of cities. People drive past them every day without thinking much about what they represent. But places like this hold something incredibly important. They hold memory. The Italian cemetery was created by immigrants, men and women who traveled thousands of miles across the Atlantic Ocean to start new lives here. Many of them arrived with very little. They worked difficult jobs. They built small businesses. They raised families in neighborhoods like North Beach. And over time, they helped shape the culture of character of San Francisco. But every life eventually reaches its final chapter. And when those early members of the Italian community passed away, their families wanted a place where they could be remembered with dignity. A place that reflected their traditions, their language, their faith, their identity as a community. That is how the Italian cemetery came to exist. Not as a monument to famous people, but as a resting place for ordinary families. The fishermen, the laborers, the shopkeepers, the parents, the children, the generations who helped build a city. If you walk slowly through the cemetery, you begin to notice patterns. The same last names appear again and again, one generation after another. A grandfather born in Italy, a son born in San Francisco, a grandson who served in the United States military. The monuments here quietly tell the story of immigration, of families leaving one country behind and building new lives in another, of cultures blending together across generations. Some monuments are large and ornate, others are small and simple, but every marker represents a life that mattered to someone. Every name carved into stone represents a story. In the early 20th century, life was not always easy. Communities faced hardship. Disease spread quickly through crowded neighborhoods. The 1918 influenza pandemic affected families across San Francisco. World wars would soon follow. And through all of it, cemeteries like this one continued to grow. Over time, the Italian community became deeply woven into the fabric of the city. Italian-American families opened restaurants, markets, and businesses that still exist today. Their culture became part of San Francisco itself. Yet here in Colma, the earlier generations remain. Their stories preserved quietly beneath the grass and marble. The cemetery stands as a reminder that cities are built not only by famous figures, but by ordinary people whose lives rarely make it into the history books. Today, Colma is often called the City of the Souls, or the City of the Dead. A small town where the number of people buried far exceeds the number of people living in it. But that title reflects something deeper. Colma has become a place where the histories of many communities are preserved. Jewish cemeteries, Catholic cemeteries, Chinese cemeteries, and the cemeteries like this one built by immigrant societies that wanted to honor their families. Walking through these grounds, you begin to understand that cemeteries are not only about death, they are also about continuity. They connect generations, they preserve memory, and they remind us that the lives we live today are built on the efforts of people who came before us. The Italian cemetery is one small part of that larger story, but it's an important one. Because within these rows of monuments are names of people who crossed oceans, who built communities, and who helped shape the history of California. If you have ever walked through a cemetery and wondered about the names on the stones, wondered who those people were, wondered what their lives were like, then you'll already understand why places like this matter. They remind us that history is not just something found in books. Sometimes it's carved quietly into marble. Thank you for taking this walk through the Italian cemetery here in Colma with me today. If you enjoy exploring cemetery history, forgotten places, and the stories that live behind these gates, consider subscribing to the channel. Because every cemetery has a story, and there will be many more still waiting to be told. Until next time, walk respectfully, read the names, and remember the lives that came before us.